Diana Rosenfield thought she could control everything: the power, the people, and the life she had built. But when her trusted assistant, Clara Jenson, disappeared under mysterious circumstances, Diana's carefully crafted world began to unravel. As the walls closed in and secrets started to surface, Diana realized the truth could destroy her. But someone knew exactly what she had done, and now there was nowhere left to hide. Diana Rosenfield had always been the embodiment of perfection. Growing up in an upscale neighborhood with a mansion that seemed to touch the clouds, she lived a life many only dreamed of. Her father, a successful real estate mogul, had built a fortune that kept her in the finest clothes, the most exclusive parties, and the best schools. From the moment she stepped into society, she was treated like royalty, surrounded by people who fawned over her every move, always eager to be in her favor. Her beauty, grace, and confident demeanor only added to her allure. Diana never had to work for anything. Everything she wanted was handed to her. It was a life that seemed too perfect, too polished to ever be interrupted. The world at her feet, she never questioned the system she was a part of, always believing that money and status would shield her from any consequence. She thrived in this bubble of privilege where the rules didn't apply to her. But as the years went on, Diana grew restless. The luxury, the constant adoration, and the social circles she inhabited no longer felt enough. There was something missing, something deeper that made her want more. Power, control, the ability to shape the world around her, to have people bending to her will. That was what she craved. And so, she began to look for ways to elevate herself beyond just the daughter of a wealthy mogul. Diana was no longer content to simply exist in a world of affluence. She wanted to control it. At first, her foray into the darker side of wealth was subtle. She made small investments in questionable business ventures, things that promised quick returns with little risk. But as time passed, Diana became bolder. Her wealth had given her a taste of what true power felt like, and she wanted more. Wasn't enough to simply spend money. She wanted to make it, manipulate it, control it. She found herself drawn into a world of high-stakes deals, secretive partnerships, and corrupt officials, where the law was more of a suggestion than a rule. It was through her assistant, Clara Jenson, that Diana entered the high-risk world of money laundering. Clara was loyal, quiet, and dependable, a perfect right hand to Diana's ever-expanding empire. What Clara didn't know was that her role in this new world was far more dangerous than she could ever imagine. Diana had been careful in keeping her distance from the operations, always staying one step away from anything that could tie her directly to the illegal activities. But she was clever, manipulative, and able to convince others that she was the victim of circumstance, even as she orchestrated her rise. The operation Diana was involved in was complex and dangerous. It was a network that stretched across multiple countries, dealing in vast sums of money that needed to be funneled into legitimate businesses. Diana's role was to handle the communications, ensure that the dirty money moved through various financial institutions without raising suspicion, and to grease the palms of those who could help her get away with it. At the center of it all was her ability to charm and deceive. Diana made deals with powerful figures who were too eager to turn a blind eye to the details. But as with all things built on lies and deception, Diana's world began to unravel slowly, almost imperceptibly at first. The people she had relied on to keep the operation secret were starting to get nervous. Rumors of an investigation into the financial sector began circulating, and Diana couldn't ignore the warning signs. The weight of the impending crash was heavy on her shoulders, but she convinced herself it wouldn't happen to her. She had always been the golden girl, the one who could talk her way out of anything. This time, however, her luck had run out. One evening, as Diana sat in her penthouse overlooking the city, a chilling thought crossed her mind. What if she had finally pushed too far? The feeling of invincibility that had defined her life began to crack. The pressure was building, the stakes higher than ever before. She was no longer just a young woman playing at power. She had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. But even as the walls began to close in, Diana's confidence remained unshaken. She refused to believe that the authorities would ever catch on to her. She had too many connections, too much leverage. And yet, deep down, she felt the first stirrings of fear. A fear she had never experienced before. The realization that her carefully constructed world might come crashing down around her was too much to ignore. She clung to the belief that she could somehow navigate the storm. After all, Diana Rosenfield had always been able to get what she wanted, and this time would be no different, or so she thought. As the weeks went by, Diana found herself drowning in a sea of panic and uncertainty. The cracks that had appeared in her perfect world were now wide open, and there was no hiding from the mess she had created. The authorities were closing in on the money laundering operation, and with each passing day, the risk of exposure grew. She had always believed she was untouchable, that her wealth and influence could shield her from any consequence. But now, reality was starting to feel like a noose tightening around her neck. The pressure became unbearable, and in those moments of sheer panic, Diana's mind began to focus on one person, Clara Jenson. Clara had been with her for years, loyal, trustworthy, and naive to the true nature of Diana's dealings. Clara was smart, though. She had a sharp intuition that had helped her navigate Diana's labyrinth of operations with ease. But Diana knew that, with the investigation moving forward, Clara would eventually figure it all out. The question wasn't if, but when, and Diana couldn't afford that moment. She couldn't risk Clara becoming a liability. It was in these dark thoughts that the plan began to form, like a seed taking root in Diana's mind. Clara had always been a safe bet, someone who could be relied upon to keep things quiet. But with the walls closing in, Diana realized that keeping her around would only increase the danger. Clara had to be eliminated, quietly, swiftly, and without anyone suspecting Diana's hand in the matter. The idea twisted in Diana's mind, but it was logical. It was the only way she could save herself. She started making plans in secret. She knew she couldn't just ask Clara to leave, to go into hiding, or to disappear. Clara was too loyal to abandon her, and Diana knew that. She had to take matters into her own hands. She knew she had to lure Clara into a trap, somewhere far, enough away that no one would hear, far enough that it would appear as if she had simply vanished. Diana chose the cabin in the woods. It was an isolated location, far from the prying eyes of the city, surrounded by tall trees that whispered with the wind. She'd used it before as a retreat when she needed to escape from her life for a while. It was perfect, a place where no one would question the absence of two women. She called Clara, arranging for them to meet there for a work retreat. Clara, always eager to help Diana with anything she needed, agreed without hesitation. The night they drove out to the cabin, Diana's mind was a whirlwind. She masked her growing anxiety with a smile, her charming demeanor once again in place. But inside, something had changed. The woman who had always been in control was now spiraling into a panic. What she had planned, what she was about to do, felt alien to her. She had always prided herself on being above such things, on being clever enough to manipulate situations without violence. But desperation had driven her to this point. It was no longer about money or power. It was about survival. When they arrived at the cabin, Clara was the first to step out of the car. Diana followed, making sure to keep a distance. The air was thick with tension, the quiet hum of the forest filling the space between them. Diana led Clara inside, offering her a drink, a smile, a gesture of hospitality that felt false in her mouth. The cabin, once a place of calm, now felt like a cage. As the night wore on, Diana carefully observed Clara, watching as her assistant settled into the evening, unaware of what was coming. They talked about work, about the things they needed to discuss. But Diana's mind wasn't on the conversation. It was on the plan, on how she would do it, how she would make it look like an accident, how she would walk away from this without a trace. Finally, after hours of waiting, the moment came. Clara excused herself to the bathroom, and that was when Diana took action. She moved quickly, grabbing the weapon she had hidden in a drawer earlier that day. It was a clean job, quick and efficient, just like Diana had always been. She didn't want to make it messy. There was no room for mistakes. If Clara struggled, if she fought back, it would complicate everything. Diana couldn't afford that. By the time Clara returned to the room, it was too late. The deed was done. Clara lay motionless on the floor, her life extinguished in the same quiet manner in which it had been taken. Diana stared down at her, her breath shallow and fast, her heart pounding in her chest. For a moment, she didn't know what to think. She had done it. She had crossed a line she never thought she would. And yet, in the midst of the horror, there was a strange sense of relief. But that relief was short-lived. As Diana stood there, looking at the lifeless body of the woman who had trusted her, something shifted in her. The weight of what she had just done began to press down on her, suffocating her. The reality of the act, the cold, calculated decision to end someone's life, was beginning to sink in. Diana Rosenfield, who had always prided herself on being above such things, was now a killer. The fear, the guilt, the paranoia, it all rushed in at once. The perfect life she had built was now shattered beyond repair. She was no longer untouchable. She was a fugitive, and the consequences of her actions were just beginning. In the days that followed Clara's death, Diana felt a heavy weight on her chest, one that refused to lift, no matter how much she tried to push it down. The relief she had briefly felt after the murder was quickly replaced with something much darker, a gnawing fear that ate away at her from the inside. Every shadow seemed to move, every creak of the house made her heart race, and every car that passed her mansion felt like it was stopping for her. Diana had always prided herself on being composed, on having control over every situation, but now she felt as if her life was slipping through her fingers. The authorities had no immediate leads. Clara was a quiet woman with few personal connections, and no one suspected Diana's involvement. Yet, Diana couldn't shake the growing sense that someone, somehow, knew what she had done. The investigation was still in its infancy, and there was no clear evidence linking Diana to the crime. But the fear persisted, gnawing at her mind until she could barely sleep. She couldn't stop replaying the moments in the cabin, the cold realization of her actions sinking in more with every passing hour. Her once perfect life, built on a foundation of wealth, status, and manipulation, felt fragile now. The walls of her mansion, once her sanctuary, seemed to close in on her, reminding her of her guilt at every turn. It wasn't just the fear of being caught. It was the terrifying thought that she had changed, that she had become someone she didn't recognize. The idea that she could take another person's life so easily, without hesitation, left her shaken. The perfect image she had crafted of herself, the strong, untouchable woman at the top of the social ladder, was crumbling. She wasn't untouchable anymore. She was just a woman who had committed murder, and that thought lingered in the corners of her mind, waiting to consume her. As the days passed, Diana's paranoia grew. She couldn't go anywhere without feeling like eyes were on her, like the world was watching her every move. The security guards at her mansion, once a comfort, now felt like a symbol of her isolation. She tried to bury herself in work, to keep herself distracted, but it was no use. Every time she checked her phone, every time she answered the door, she wondered if it was someone coming to arrest her. And when the phone rang, her heart would stop, her breath would catch in her throat. She was certain it was the police, finally coming for her. But each time, it was just another call, another piece of the world she was desperately trying to outrun. The worst part was the silence. Clara's absence was deafening. She had been more than just an assistant. She had been a constant in Diana's life, a reminder of the order she had created. Now, with Clara gone, Diana was left alone with her thoughts, and those thoughts were starting to break her down. She had thought she could handle anything, had always believed she was in control. But the weight of her crime was too much. The more she tried to push it away, the more it clung to her, like a shadow that wouldn't leave. Her once carefree demeanor became a facade, a mask that she wore more tightly each day. She couldn't let anyone see the cracks. Not her father, not her friends, and certainly not the people in her social circle who had always admired her. She continued to attend events, to host parties, to project the image of the powerful, untouchable woman she had always been. But inside, she was falling apart. The nights grew longer, filled with restless sleep and waking nightmares. Her mind wandered back to the cabin, to Clara's body, to the moment when she had taken her life. The image haunted her at all hours, refusing to let her forget. In her mind, Diana could see it all playing out again, over and over. She replayed the scene, analyzing every movement, every decision she had made. She thought of ways she could have stopped, how she could have found another way out. But it was too late. The reality of what she had done began to sink in deeper, gnawing at her until she couldn't ignore it any longer. It wasn't just the guilt, it was the truth that she could never take back what she had done. Clara was gone, and there was nothing Diana could do to undo the damage. The paranoia reached its peak when she received a strange package in the mail. No return address, no name, just a plain envelope. Diana's heart pounded in her chest as she opened it, her fingers trembling. Inside was a single photograph, Clara's face, staring back at her, lifeless. The photo had been taken in the cabin, the same place where Diana had killed her. It was a haunting reminder that someone knew, that someone had been watching. Diana froze, her blood running cold as she wondered who else knew the truth. Was the person who sent the photo going to expose her? Or was it someone who wanted to hurt her, to break her down like she had broken Clara? The fear was consuming her now, and there was no escape. She couldn't outrun the truth. It had caught up with her, and Diana knew that it would only be a matter of time before it all unraveled. The life she had worked so hard to create was slipping away, piece by piece, and no amount of wealth or influence could protect her from the consequences of her actions. As the days turned into weeks, Diana's once glamorous existence had become a prison. The fear that had taken root inside her mind had festered into something far more dangerous. It wasn't just the thought of being caught, it was the realization that she had crossed a point of no return. The world she had carefully built with her wealth, her charm, and her cunning was crumbling, piece by piece, and she could do nothing to stop it. The dread that had started as a quiet whisper had now become a deafening roar, filling every corner of her life. She couldn't escape it. The walls were closing in, and no matter how much she tried to run, she couldn't outrun the consequences of her actions. Diana began to make reckless decisions, fueled by a sense of desperation she had never known before. She thought that maybe, just maybe, if she threw enough money at the problem, it would go away. She tried to bribe officials, to buy off anyone who could stand in her way. She paid for private investigators, hoping they could find a way to erase all traces of her involvement. But the more she tried to fix the situation, the worse it became. Her resources, once endless, were now being drained faster than she could replenish them, and the connections that had once kept her untouchable were starting to withdraw. Her father, once her greatest ally, began to distance himself. He had always known his daughter was clever, but this was beyond what he could accept. Diana had always been able to manipulate the world around her, but now, even her father was starting to see her for what she had become, a dangerous, reckless woman who had gone too far. He had always provided her with the security and freedom, to live her life as she pleased. But now he saw how far she had strayed from the path. He was no longer willing to protect her, not when the stakes were this high. But even as the support of her family and connections began to slip away, Diana clung to the belief that she could still fix everything. She started to make plans to disappear, completely. The thought of running away to a far-off place where no one could find her seemed like the only option left. She began to liquidate assets, to stash away as much money as she could in secret, accounts, and to make arrangements to leave the country. But even in her attempts to escape, she couldn't outrun her own fear. Every plan she made, every move she took, felt like a step deeper into a trap she couldn't escape. It wasn't just the authorities she feared now. It was her own mind. Diana had once been a master of manipulation, a woman who could control every situation. But now she couldn't even control her own thoughts. Her mind, once sharp and calculated, had become a chaotic whirlwind of paranoia and anxiety. She would sit in her mansion, staring out the window, convinced that someone was watching her. At night, she heard noises in the house, phantom footsteps that made her heart race, made her jump at every sound. She would turn on the lights, searching for the source of the noise, only to find nothing. Yet, every time the silence returned, it felt heavier, suffocating. The deeper Diana sank into her paranoia, the more disconnected she became from the world around her. The people who had once adored her, who had once placed her on a pedestal, now saw her as a danger, a liability. They began to pull away, to avoid her calls and invitations. The same social circles that had once bent over backward to be in her presence now whispered behind her back. The once untouchable Diana Rosenfield was now a broken woman, running from the consequences of her own actions, unable to hide the fear and guilt that were written on her face. It was in the middle of this descent into madness that Diana received another letter, another haunting reminder of what she had done. This time, it wasn't a photograph. It was a simple note, written in bold block letters. "You can't hide forever. I know what you did." The message was clear. Someone knew. And they were watching her. Diana felt her world begin to spiral out of control. She had no idea who could be behind the letter, but it didn't matter. Whoever it was, they had the power to destroy her. The paranoia consumed her now. The thought that someone knew her darkest secret, that someone was waiting for the right moment to bring her down, was more than she could bear. She couldn't trust anyone. She couldn't trust herself. She had thought she could control everything, but now, she saw just how out of control her life had become. Desperate, Diana began to take more extreme measures to protect herself. She hired a private security team to watch over her, to ensure no one could get close enough to hurt her. She increased her efforts to cover her tracks, even going so far as to erase every possible link between her and the murder of Clara Jenson. But the more she tried to hide, the more the walls closed in. The sense of inevitability weighed heavily on her. It was only a matter of time before her actions caught up with her. She could feel it. She could taste it in the air. The once proud and powerful Diana Rosenfield was now a broken woman, clinging to the last remnants of her former life. She had everything to lose, and yet she couldn't stop herself from spiraling deeper into the abyss. The luxury, the wealth, the power, none of it mattered anymore. All she had now was fear, and the haunting realization that she had become a prisoner of her own making. There was no escaping the truth. No amount of money, no amount of influence could undo the damage she had done. And Diana knew, deep down, that her life was over. It was only a matter of time before everything she had worked for and everything she had destroyed came crashing down. As the days dragged on, Diana's sense of dread began to consume her entirely. The walls of her mansion, once a symbol of her wealth and status, now felt like a suffocating prison. Every noise in the house, Every rustle of a curtain, every shadow cast across the floor was enough to make her heart race. She couldn't escape the feeling that someone was watching her, waiting for the moment to strike. The paranoia had taken over her mind, and even in the safety of her own home, Diana felt exposed. The world outside seemed like a distant memory, a place she could no longer reach. The letters had stopped, but the fear hadn't. Diana was convinced that the person who had sent them was only waiting for the right moment to reveal everything. The silence felt like a ticking time bomb, the minutes and hours stretching on endlessly, each one bringing her closer to the inevitable. She couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. The weight of her actions hung over her like a cloud, and no amount of distractions could push it away. Her thoughts constantly returned to Clara. The image of Clara's lifeless body haunted her every waking moment. The look on Clara's face, the innocence she had once carried, had now been replaced with a cold, lifeless stare. Diana could still remember the way Clara had looked up at her one last time, a flicker of confusion in her eyes, before everything had gone dark. She had been the one person in Diana's life who had truly believed in her, who had trusted her, completely. And Diana had taken that trust and destroyed it in the most brutal way possible. The guilt ate away at her from the inside, gnawing at her sanity. She had convinced herself that she had done what was necessary, that Clara had been a threat to her survival. But deep down, Diana knew it wasn't true. Clara hadn't been a threat. She had been a casualty of Diana's own unraveling mind, a pawn in a game she had no control over anymore. Diana had become a monster in her own eyes, a woman capable of taking the life of someone she had once cared for, someone who had been loyal to her until the very end. Diana had tried everything to escape. She had thought of leaving the country, starting fresh in some distant corner of the world where no one would know her name. But with each plan she made, the more impossible it seemed. The money was running out, and her once strong network of connections had begun to turn against her. She could feel the walls closing in, and no amount of escape could give her peace. She was trapped in a life she had created with her own hands, a life built on lies, manipulation, and betrayal. She had no friends left, no allies to turn to. The people she had once trusted had all disappeared, either out of fear or disgust. Even her father had washed his hands of her, unable to protect her from the inevitable fall that was coming. She had always thought that nothing could touch her, that her wealth and power would shield her from any consequence. But now, she realized that power was nothing without the ability to control the situation. And she had lost that control long ago. The authorities had begun to close in. It wasn't just the letters that made Diana feel like she was on the brink of collapse. It was the whispers. The rumors had started to spread, like wildfire, among the people who had once looked up to her. She could hear them in the halls of her mansion, in the quiet murmurs of the staff, in the way people avoided her gaze when she passed by. They were talking about her, about Clara, about what had happened. It was only a matter of time before the truth was exposed. The fear began to make her reckless. Diana stopped hiding in the shadows, stopped making attempts to disappear. Instead, she took to attending events, trying to maintain the illusion of normalcy, trying to hold on to the life she had once known. But the cracks in her facade were obvious. People began to notice how jittery she was, how her smile never quite reached her eyes, how her voice trembled when she spoke. Diana wasn't the confident, untouchable woman she had once been. She was a woman unraveling, a woman who had lost control over everything that had once mattered. One evening, while at a gala she had reluctantly attended, Diana received a phone call that changed everything. She had expected it to be one of her contacts, someone she could manipulate to her advantage. But when she answered, the voice on the other end was unfamiliar. It was cold, calculated, and dripping with venom. "We know what you did, Diana," the voice said. "It's only a matter of time now." Diana's heart froze. She had been prepared for this moment in the back of her mind, but now that it had come, she wasn't ready. Her knees buckled, and she had to grip the edge of the table to keep herself from collapsing. The world around her seemed to spin, the noise of the gala fading into the background. The voice on the other end of the line continued, but Diana couldn't hear it anymore. Her mind had shut down, and all she could think about was the inevitable. The truth was out there. Someone had found the evidence, or maybe they had simply pieced together the story. Diana knew that there was no escaping now. She couldn't run, couldn't hide behind her wealth or her charm anymore. The life she had built, the lies she had told, had all led her to this moment. She had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and now there was no turning back. As the call ended, Diana stood there in the middle of the gala, the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses swirling around her. But she couldn't focus on any of it. The walls had come crashing down. There was no escape from the truth. Diana had been living in a world of her own making, but now reality had caught up with her, and the consequences of her actions were about to destroy everything.